What up, nerds? It is I, Brother Jay, the movie monk, as you can see, and you're attending Movie Mass. It's early in the week. As I'm filming this, it's Monday. So I've got last week's movies fresh on my brain. Obviously, I still don't know how Letterboxd works. I'm not even sure I said it. Letterboxd works? I'm not sure how Letterboxd works. I'm not even sure I'm speaking English anymore. Like, I've said the word enough times that it's starting to feel weird. It's starting to feel like I'm culturally appropriating some East Asian language or some shit like that. I'm gonna come out with nunchucks in the next video. Anyway, I don't know how Letterboxd works. And me mispronouncing that is probably funnier than that joke was. Anyway, I watched some movies last week. I only watched 4. I've been doing 5 a week the past couple of weeks, but last week I only managed to get 4 in. I'm sorry, guys, I'm busy. I'm in the middle of an internship. I got a case study for the hospital going, and so, you know, I'm a busy man these days, and I apologize for it, but I did manage to squeeze a few movies in. So first I watched Friday the 13th from 2009. That's the remake. Arrow put out a nice 4K. You could see the reflection of my monitor illuminating that very tasteful spot gloss on that slipcover right there. Look at that. That's why we do this hobby, everybody. Look at that tasteful spot gloss on that slipcover. And that's why we don't buy standard editions, everybody. You know, you save a few bucks buying the standard editions, which normally I'm all about, but you miss out on that tasteful spot gloss on that hockey mask. Anyway, I recommended Friday the 13th in a recent video for a September viewing. And look, I'm obviously not a hypocrite. What am I doing in September? I'm watching Friday the 13th, 2009. I'm not going to repeat any of the points that I made in that previous video. That previous video was geared towards telling you why Friday the 13th was appropriate for September. I'm not here to convince you of that. I have rested my case in that regard, but I do want to talk a little bit about how I felt about the film now. It had been a long time since I'd seen it. I think I've maybe seen it once since the theaters. I went to see it on its original theatrical release, of course, in 2009, and then I think I probably caught it on maybe either like a streaming service some years later. I've never owned it before, so I didn't watch it on Blu-ray or anything like that. So it must have been a streaming service. I can logically conclude that it can only have been a streaming service that I caught it on. And then I think this last week was just my 3rd time watching it. And what really strikes me about Friday the 13th remake is just how much homage is present in this film. And on the one hand, I really appreciate the homage to some of those original, especially the first 4 or so titles, maybe the 5th one with that old lady when he drives his motorcycle up to that old lady's house and he knocks on the door and he's looking for his sister, and that old lady's being a wicked bitch to him and she's like, hey, she's dead, your sister dead. That kind of reminded me of the hillbilly mom and son from part 5, but there was just a lot of homage to the original Friday the 13th, which I think, you know, on the one hand is kind of playing it safe, but honestly I think maybe with 2009 they did a little bit too much homage. Like, it feels as if in some ways they never really broke out of the shadow of those originals. And I don't think you can live in the shadow of original films in a beloved franchise like Friday the 13th. So, I mean, I don't feel like they really nail the feel of a Friday the 13th here. It mostly comes down to the mise-en-scène and cinematography. I think it's like a little bit more woodsy than campish. Like, they feel like they're camping out in the woods, and then when they're hanging out at that dipshit's house, it's like a nice modern house. I feel like the cabin that they're staying in is too modern. It almost has too much of a suburban feel when the cop pulls up to the door just before Jason kills him. It just doesn't feel as like dusty and rickety as some of the cabins we see in the OG Friday the 13th series. Like part 3, for instance, is not set at a camp either. Part 3 is also set at a family's lake house. And it's called Higgins Haven in part 3. I think in part 3, the cabin there, Higgins Haven, it has the old barn. It feels, and obviously it's also a product of when it was made, it feels very 60s and 70s-ish. It feels like an old building, you know, a lake house that was built many, many decades ago where this douchebag's lake house just felt too modern. There was like too much glass and like really big window panes and stuff like that. It really felt like something that was built in the late 90s. And I don't know why, it's probably my age, but shit that was built in the late 90s just is not very scary to me. I'm just too modern, too new. Honestly, the color of the film, the color grading of the film is cat puke, honestly. It's like this grayish tan color grading. I think I complained about that before, so I won't go on about that, but it is the color of cat puke. So that's what that color grading is called. That's the cat puke color grade, because I have cleaned up enough cat puke in my time to know. It's just like this weird, yucky, gray tan color. And that is this movie, where I think earlier Friday the 13th had a little bit more life in them, in the photography, in the color grading, and you know, they're horror films, and much of the action in part 2 and 3 and 4 occurs at night, but there are daytime scenes, and they are fairly well lit, and skin tones are nice and warm and pink, especially when them girls start taking them tops off. In Friday the 13th part 4, you do want a more rosy color grading that's gonna bring out some of those pink, you know, those pink body tones that we're gonna appreciate in scenes like that. So I do think you get a little bit more color in those. I mean, go watch the 4K for Friday the 13th part 2. I watched that one with my man Chase and was very impressed with that 4K, and it was a very colorful 4K. So I think that it just doesn't quite nail the visual style of the original films either, while maybe being a little bit too wrapped up in paying homage to certain story beats and certain recognizable story elements. Now, the next film I watched last week, it was, of course, my daughter's first day of first grade. My oldest daughter, my youngest daughter is still in daycare, but my oldest daughter just started first grade last week. Her first day of first grade was 1 week ago. I was feeling sentimental, so I watched Back to School. Not that this has anything to do with first grade, but this time of year when school starts again, especially college, Rodney Dangerfield, I don't know, I was just recently back in school for yet another degree. I was back in college at University of New Hampshire. I was at UNH for several years, and I used to joke that I felt like Rodney Dangerfield in Back to School, because I'm kind of old. I'm a little bit older, right? I'm not Rodney Dangerfield's age, thank Jesus, but I'm a lot older than the kids that I was in class with, even in the master's degree. Most of those young people were 23, 24 years old. I'm obviously older than that. So I often joked that I felt like Rodney Dangerfield in Back to School, like re-enrolling in college, and I'm just old. Anyway, great movie in my opinion. It's just a classic stupid movie. I recommended this one as well, so I'll stick to separate analysis here and try to talk about other things other than why you should watch this in September. I think I made that case, but there's just parts of this movie that make zero sense. For instance, Rodney Dangerfield's character, Thornton Mellon, has a son named Jason who's going to that college as well. In fact, that's what gets Thornton to enroll. But Jason, the character of Jason Melon, is like 6 inches shorter than his love interest. I think her name is Daphne in the film. And it shows. I mean, in every like shot, reverse shot, he looks so much shorter than her. They cast an actor, I think it's Keith Gordon who plays Jason Melon. The actor is 5'8". Why would you cast an actor that short, especially when you're going to turn around and cast an actress to play Daphne who's 6 feet tall as his love interest? Why would you do that? You're telling me you couldn't have cast different actors to gender reverse that 4-inch deficit? You couldn't cast a 6 foot tall dude and a 5'8" lady? I just feel like that romance subplot between Jason and the Daphne, I think it's Daphne or it's Denise, it's a D name, not important. But Jason, the son, and the girl, the cute girl that he's with, that's 1.5 feet taller than him, that romance subplot is like quintessential short king fantasy. I don't know why they needed to include that. Every time I watch this movie, I'm like, look, this girl is 20 years old, 21 years old. She's young, right? She's like a sophomore in college. She's 20, maybe she's 21, but she's in that neighborhood. She's extraordinarily cute. She's like, I don't know if she's an athlete or what, but she's well built. She's cute. She looks good in the caveman outfit. Why on earth would a 21-year-old girl that could date any guy on that college campus choose a dude who's a literal manlet with that hairline? You gotta, What I need out of a romance, and I love Back to School. It sounds like I'm criticizing. I'm not. This is an unimpeachable film. But what you got to do for me, if you're going to try to convince me of a romance, you gotta make it realistic. Okay? If the dude's 5'8" and he's got kind of a tragedy happening up here with the hairline, then you need to cast a dumpier broad as his love interest to make me believe it. You can't cast a 10 to be the love interest of a dude who's a 6. Because a girl that age who's a 10 could literally just say 4 words to any single guy on that campus. And boom, she's got her choice of 99% of the dudes on that campus that aren't gay. Anyway, I apologize for that tangent. I do love the friction between Professor Barbet's disdain for Thornton Mellon's admission juxtaposed with Thornton's large donation helping Barbet have a place to teach. So the film makes a theme of comparing a nouveau riche to noble class, the people who are maybe born into a life of, if not wealth and opulence, at least privilege. And it's a very classist story. Of course, you've got the professor who is the main antagonist against Thornton Mellon, and he is an elitist. He's even they make him a British, he's the only British character. Apparently he came over from England to teach over here in New York because it's an upstate New York college, but he's a British character, which obviously makes him sound more elitist because he's got that upper crust sort of British, like a noble sort of lord type of accent. It's not one of these like Cockney, like chimney sweep accents. It's like I'm a fine British gentleman. You know, my father was a lord and I'm going to inherit a castle type of accents. So he's this obviously very well-educated, you know, doctor in business. And Thornton Mellon is a self-made man. He grew up poor, but he has a very acute business savvy that he capitalized on, and he made himself very wealthy, even more so than the professor himself, because you don't make that much on a teaching gig. But there's this friction between these two characters because they're kind of opposites. Thornton, of course, because he is self-made, he does have a value, or does place value in sort of like lower class activities. Thornton's gonna throw a party. Thornton's gonna throw a kegger. Thornton's gonna go to a bar and buy drinks for everybody, and he really tries to have a good time and enjoy himself with his money and not let his wealth get to his head. And so the professor views him with some disdain. He's nouveau riche. He's trying to buy his way out of the gutter. I actually think that this conflict is you know, it's a silly movie. It's Back to School. It's a dumb movie, right? It's like, it's not a Criterion Collection film. Radiance is not going to be releasing this one anytime soon. But there is this, I think, friction that's very well realized. It's actually a very well done conflict. Thornton's donation to the school, obviously it's very sizable. That gets him into the college, which, you know, his elitist professor, Dr. Barbet, feels like is very unfair. But Thornton's donation objectively improves the quality of education for these other students by providing them with these modern facilities and materials and giving money to a faculty that will then be able to teach them. And so even though I agree with Dr. Barbet on principle that you shouldn't be able to buy your way into a higher education institution, at the same time, Thornton is improving the quality of education for everybody. It literally is a rising tide raising all boats. Thornton is there, he raises the tide, and all of the other students are going to also benefit from the material improvement in their education, and they have him to thank for it. And so it's a really kind of an interesting conflict in that, should he have been able to buy his way into the school? He still has to, he's not buying his degree. It's not like joining a karate school and then just buying a black belt, because that doesn't do any good. You'd still get your ass whipped because you just bought the black belt. You didn't train for it. But it's like buying your way into a karate school. Okay, you're in, but now you still have to train. You still have to pass your tests in order to obtain that black belt. They weren't just giving him the degree. They were letting him in a little bit easy without that. They waived the requirements a little bit, but it's a great movie to watch in the fall. I highly recommend it. The next film I watched last week was Millionaires Express. You can ignore it. It says Shanghai Express right there, but that is the title it was known by, I think, in the UK. Shanghai Express is a movie, guys. It's not this movie either. It's a classic Hollywood film, and so I don't like to call this one Shanghai Express. I prefer to call this one by its original name, the Millionaires Express, because I don't want to confuse it with the classic Hollywood. See, there's the original title, Millionaires Express. It's a fun movie. It's kind of a crazy movie. It's an 80s goofball martial arts movie. Goofball in the sense that, like, it's not to be taken very seriously. It's kind of, in a lot of ways, it's kind of a precursor to the Moletao comedic style of someone like Stephen Chow, who we're all familiar with here in the West for things like Shaolin Soccer and Kung Fu Hustle. But this Moletao comedic style, Moletao translates to sort of goofball or nonsensical nonsense. It's sort of an absurdist style of comedy. There's absurd visual gags. There's things are taken very far and they proceed to get very over the top and are very silly. That style did develop in the latter, quarter or so of the 20th century in Hong Kong. And in a lot of ways, I do believe that something like Millionaires Express represents maybe an early entry in that as we build towards the turn of the century into the 21st century. If you're interested in this kind of like side niche of Hong Kong cinema, Moletao kind of comedic style of cinema, I think Millionaires Express is maybe an important piece of the construction or development of that style. So there's a lot of incongruencies that are characteristic of the Moletao style here. There's like a Western genre stylings all over this movie. So some of the semiotics that you're used to seeing in a Western film, guys riding horses with the hats on and the gloves and the coats and the whole cowboy outfit. There's the train, the Millionaires Express, the movie's named after. The train itself is carrying all of these like rich fat cats that have a lot of money. There's a train station in this dusty old one-horse town. It's all a lot of stuff that's just a staple of Westerns. Most of the characters are dressed like they're in a Western film. Sammo Hung wears a cowboy outfit pretty much the whole time. He's got like the leather coat, he's got the bandana, he's got the hat. Pretty much the whole film, that's how he's dressed. He's riding a horse for much of the film. He does look like he's just hopped off the set of like a 1950s, 1960s era a Western film. However, as much as it looks like a Western genre film, they make it clear that the action of this film is set in China. Nearly all of the dialogue is in Chinese language. Furthermore, they don't have any of those like duels. You think of the duel in the middle of the street or whatever, and just boom, quick shoot or whatever. They don't really have any of those. But there's like several kung fu fights that are like more in line with mid-80s Hong Kong stuff. So it really is kind of a strange mashup in that sense that they just sort of inexplicably take all of these trappings from a Western genre film and bring them into China, early 20th century China, maybe even late 19th century China. I'm not sure exactly what year this is set, but it's probably turn of the 20th century, give or take 10 years, pre-World War I China, let's put it that way. No real explanation for why everybody's dressed like they've been watching John Wayne movies their entire life growing up, because they couldn't have been, because it's 1899. It's a little bit of a scattershot movie. Like, I appreciate this sort of, like, they're just throwing stuff at the wall is what it felt like. And some of the stuff I think sticks pretty well. Some of the stuff, maybe it doesn't stick super well, but I still nonetheless appreciated the effort. Like, A, for creativity, right? Like, they're trying something new, at least with some of this stuff. And some of the martial arts scenes are still pretty awesome. It's Sammo Hung. He's doing a good job with the choreography of the martial arts. He fights with Yin Bao and Cynthia Rothrock in this movie. So, you've got some really excellent talent, I think, for a martial arts genre film. And I will say with Millionaires Express, they do have some good kung fu fight scenes, but they almost lean into the comedy a little bit more in this one. There are some good fight scenes, but they're a little bit fewer and a little bit further between, although the ending is a little bit like bonkers and over the top. The climactic battle it's 20 minutes of kind of insanity, but I do think it's well worth seeing, Millionaires Express, so check this out. I do understand why it's more of a cult classic than some other martial arts films, maybe of the same era, but definitely well worth checking out. And without further ado, I'm going to show you the winner of the week. That is Risky Business. Risky Business was released in August, so I usually think it's a fairly safe, end of summer, early fall watch. It's a little bit harder to peg when this is taking place. I think September is a safe bet for when this movie takes place. There are a couple of scenes of Joel. This is Joel, the Tom Cruise character. There's a couple of scenes of Joel raking leaves in the backyard. So that has a very fall-ish feel. Also, he's in school. There's several scenes of him actually, going to class. So it's not happening during the summertime when school would be out for the summer. This is set in Chicago, so it's kind of obvious that it would be following an American school schedule, yearly schedule. So this is not happening in early August. Probably not happening in August at all. The action of this film most likely takes place in September. Late September, maybe October. He's already done his application, so he's doing some interviews for college, and that would be occurring probably early on in your senior year. You've got your senior year to get accepted, make a decision, and line things up for that next fall. So it makes sense that he's kind of in the midst of that. It's the fall of his senior year. I believe he's 17 or maybe 18, about to be 18. He's at the cusp of adulthood. And so it makes sense for this to be set somewhere in September and or October before the winter time. And this one is just hauntingly good. Risky Business is hauntingly good. It is one of those great movies that you'll watch it and you'll find yourself thinking about it for days afterward. And honestly, they had me at Score by Tangerine Dream. It doesn't take much more than that to get me. The score was every bit as good as you'd expect. And I didn't remember, having seen this movie when I was younger. This is my first time watching it on 4K. And in fact, I think this is my first time owning the film. But I did not remember, as a younger person, having watched this way back when, I didn't remember how phenomenal the score of this film is. It's dreamlike and ethereal, even as Tom Cruise opens the film, describing a recurring dream he has. Last week, during this same recap of my movies that I watched, I complained that A Man Called Hero felt like two different films in a way that doesn't really work very well, that was a little bit maybe jarring and inconsistent. But I think Risky Business is an example of where it does work. Risky Business actually feels like a couple of different films in the best way possible, almost like layers, like a lasagna, right? Lasagna's got layers. We like lasagna around here. If you don't like lasagna, unsubscribe now, okay? At any rate, on its surface, at a most simple reading of Risky Business, it's a movie about a teenager being a teenager, basically. He's horny as fuck. He's acting out a little bit in defiance of his parents. He's turning up the stereo louder than he's supposed to. He's borrowing his dad's Porsche. He's inviting people over when he's not supposed to because his parents are out of town, etc. There is some sex comedy here, right? His friend orders him, played by Curtis Armstrong, actually, Curtis Armstrong just doing what he did for basically the entirety of the 80s. This is how he paid his bills for the entirety of the 80s. I think he's like 35 when he made this movie too. He's just one of these guys that I guess looked like a teenager until he turned 50. At any rate, Curtis Armstrong is Tom Cruise's buddy in this movie, and he orders him a hooker. It's like a practical joke. He just calls the number. He says, oh, come on by at 9. And then he eats the phone number so Tom Cruise can't get it back and correct things. And then 9 o'clock rolls around, and this linebacker looking black crossdresser shows up, in complete drag. I'm assuming, I don't believe it was a trans woman. I believe that this was intended to be a cross-dressing prostitute, like RuPaul with way more testosterone and a dress on shows up at Joel's. And it's a bit of a subversion of expectation because you're not expecting a giant cross-dressing hooker to show up. So, it gives the audience a laugh, right, by subverting our expectations there. But then there's also some tantalizing female nudity, which is very common in a teen sex comedy. Rebecca De Mornay making me so Rebecca De Horny. Yeah, that one sounded better in my head. But Risky Business is no Porky's or American Pie, okay? There's another film here, beneath that veneer. You could sell Risky Business to a 15-year-old boy by saying, hey, you get to see Rebecca De Mornay's bush. Boom. Tangerine Dream, I'm in, dude. I'm like the gif of the guy diving through the window to get into the car without touching the car. You got Tangerine Dream playing and Rebecca De Mornay's Bush in the back seat, I'm diving right through that window. Dog. Risky Business is as much a coming-of-age story about Joel finally getting in them sweet, sweet sugar walls as it is a story about him awakening to like the real world. It's not just a story about him finally having sex. In fact, he has sex pretty early on in the film, actually. That's kind of the start, that's like the inciting incident for all of the rest of the conflict of the film. Joel is an ambitious young man from considerable privilege. He's very upper middle class. His dad has a Porsche, for Christ's sake. They got a Fabergé egg. They got everything, right? They got a nice big house. They got a fancy stereo system. You know he's coming from an upper crust kind of family. Not a 1%. They're not Rockefellers or anything like that, but he comes from an upper crust and considerable privilege. He's destined for an Ivy League education. But he's also goody two-shoes. He's very risk-averse at the beginning of the film. He's terrified of stepping out of line lest it cost him his future. His chief anxiety in this film is the ruination of his entire future. He views things in a very black and white type of way like that. Like if he steps out of line, gets in even a little bit of trouble, it's not just a hurdle for him, it's like his whole future is ruined. And so it's a little on the nose that his last name is Goodson, Joel Goodson, good son, because that's like exactly what he is at the beginning of Risky Business. His awakening then, it's not just a sexual awakening, it's that he learns how the world really works. I mean, this isn't really a movie about sex, it's about grift, it's about making money, it's about how the world really works, it's about how transactional things can really be, and it's pretty incredible when you view it as such. Joel begins the film thinking that if he follows the rules, he's going to advance in his school and advance in his career, but what he does is he learns real capitalism from Lana, the Rebecca De Mornay character. He sees what she's willing to do to get ahead, and he also realizes that he's handicapped in his own pursuit, right? He's handicapped in his own life because he's got this attachment to the rules and even these things that he has to buy back from the pimp at the end. So ultimately, it's kind of a dark film because we watch this charming young man, right? I mean, like this is the role that made Tom Cruise. Look at his face in this movie. We watch him as he starts to wear sunglasses and smoke, and he learns as he takes on this cynicism as he's exposed to the real world. So that crack in the egg at the end is representative of this, you know, metamorphosis that he's going through. Because what does a chicken do? A chicken hatches, right? It has to break the egg in order to continue to develop. So in that sense, that crack in the egg kind of represents Joel beginning to learn about the world around him, beginning to kind of come out of his shell, his cloistered sort of environment where he wasn't exposed to pimps and hookers and that kind of low life type of scumbaggery that he does associate with in this film a little bit. So again, this is no Porky's, it's no American Pie. You come away from Risky Business contemplating things like the transactional nature of romance or the inherent risk in trusting people and the idea that maybe everything is just a grift. Like every relationship, every sweet nothing, every kind word, it's all just to manipulate you. And so there's, I think, a lot more I could say about Risky Business that I won't for the sake of time, but I'll do a whole analysis on the film if anyone's interested. And with that said, that is the 4 films that I watched last week. I'm going to watch some more this week, I think. I got a big pile of unwatched movies, as you know, so I'm going to dig into that this week. I'll catch you guys on the flippy dippy. I would like to say thank you to these real motherfuckers right here. These are the real ones. If your name ain't on that list, you know what to do. You can get right. It's very easy. And I love you people. Thanks for doing the right thing. Here's to you. I'm going to drink this here. Oh, it burns.